Hey everybody, Jay Widener here. Took a week off because of harvest. Brought in a lot of tomatoes and cabbages and all sorts of stuff. And so I'm back with my reading from the book. We are still on chapter 7, and this is section 2, 3 views of the cross. In attempting to decipher Hendaye's message, we can draw on 3 somewhat different but interrelated interpretations. Along with Fulcanelli's chapter in Mystery of the Cathedrals, we have Jules Boucher's 1936 article in Consolation and Paul Mevryl's epilogue to the Fulcanelli phenomenon. These perspectives act like lenses, some microscopic, some telescopic, some distorting as a funhouse mirror. But before we turn to the raw simplicity of the monument itself, we need to examine these viewpoints with care. Even the distortions we will find can offer us valuable information. Although Fulcanelli seems to have visited in the early 1920s, his account was not published until the second edition of Mystery of the Cathedrals in 1957. Therefore, Jules Boucher's 1936 article is our first glimpse of the monument to the end of time, and a rather strange one it is. And here's the article in a French magazine, occult magazine called Consolation. And this is the Cross of Hendaye, at least one picture of it. I'll show you more. First of all, there is the curious matter of M. Lemoyne, the painter of great talent whose vacation photographs supposedly brought the monument to light. A search of French artists of the period turns up no Lemoynes. The name, which is simply the French phrase the monk, is not very common, which leads us to suspect that it is a pseudonym. Perhaps Monsieur le Monk was Fulcanelli. Boucher does quote Fulcanelli in the article, but does not connect him directly to Hendaye. The quote is from Dwellings of the Philosophers and concerns the symbology of the St. Andrew's cross. Fulcanelli seems to lurk in the background of Boucher's article, never quite emerging into the light. The article begins with a simple description of the cross. Boucher lists the points that interest him, the 4 faces of the base, the Latin inscription, the INRI, and the St. Andrew's cross above the inscription. Then he plunges immediately into an interpretation of the inscription. As we noted in chapter 1, Boucher's attempt shows some familiarity with Fulcanelli's interpretation. However, Boucher falls far short of completely deciphering the inscription. Fulcanelli, as we shall see in his Hendaye chapter, is very clear on how the phonetic transformation of the phrase can be accomplished. Boucher then moves to the symbols on the base of the cross, going west, east, north, south in a zigzag manner. He begins with the western face, which he calls the devouring sun. That's this right here. The sun with 16 rays, an angry sun, and it has 4 stars around it on each corner. He begins with the western face, which he calls the devouring sun, telling us that its 16 rays suggest the 16th trump of the tarot, the blasted tower, an image of catastrophe. While this suggestion is close to the mark, particularly the idea of using tarot images for the pedestal symbols, it is also skewed. If you knew that the image had something to do with a catastrophe, you might simply focus on the catastrophe trump without looking any further. The more obvious tarot trumps would be the sun. The star image on the eastern side receives the same treatment. Boucher says that it greets the east and has 8 rays, therefore it symbolizes trump number 8, justice. On the north side is the obvious moon image, yet Boucher does not follow his tarot interpretation and suggests that it is trump number 18, the moon. He does not follow the intro interpretation and suggest that it is trump number 18, the moon. He merely says it is an obscure Egyptian symbol that hides a secret. Although the south side contains an image of the 4 ages, according to Boucher, but he does not mention the obvious tarot analog, the Last Judgment. He gives us the 4 ages, Ovid's name, names the age of gold, silver, bronze, and iron. He concludes that we are living in the Iron Age, full of, quote, crimes and calamities, unquote, but does not offer any predictions of a double catastrophe. Indeed, later in the article, Boucher says that it's not possible to pinpoint the exact location or time of the catastrophe, demonstrating that he has missed the point of the cross's message. Or he is obscuring it for the unenlightened. Perhaps that was all the information he was given, and not having the whole story was left to fill in the gaps the best he could. The Tarot suggestions alone point to the fact that Boucher sources, if not Boucher himself, understood the importance of the Tarot in deciphering the monument. The attribution that Boucher gives are, of course, incorrect, but what he leaves out points to the true attributions. There are obvious Tarot choices for all four faces, which Boucher seems to avoid at all costs. We shall see why when we turn to the monument itself. If M. Lemoyne was Fulcanelli, what did he hope to gain by calling attention to Hendaye? It might have been sort of a trial balloon. He let one of his students publish the key to the mystery in an indirect way just to see what would develop. If that is in fact the case, it seems most likely then Fulcanelli had already in 1936 made his departure from the secret society whose oaths he was obligated to obey in Mystery of the Cathedrals. However, even the knowledgeable student would have been hard-pressed to make much of Boucher's article. And so many years later, Fulcanelli would give the whole story to Cancelet. The cyclic Cross at Hendaye is the next to last or penultimate chapter of Fulcanelli's masterpiece. After wading through thickets of erudition and punning slang, this chapter feels awash with the bright sunlight of its Basque setting. The description of the monument and its location is clear and direct. Even the explanation of the monument's apparent meaning is simple and virtually free of the green language code used throughout the book. Quote, whatever its age, the Hendaye cross shows by the decoration of its pedestal that is the strangest monument of primitive millennialism, the rarest symbolical translation of Chileism which I have ever met, unquote. Coming from Fulcanelli, this is high praise indeed. He goes on to tell us that, quote, that the unknown workman who made these images possessed real and profound knowledge of the universe, unquote. He continues with the description of the Latin inscription on the transverse arm of the cross. It contains 17 letters in the following order: O-C-R-U-X-A-V-E-S, and then underneath that is P-E-S-U-N-I-C-A. Here's a picture of it. Two Latin words, or phrases, I mean. As Fulcanelli notes, this is quite simply, Hail, O Cross, the only hope, unquote, a common Latin mortuary inscription. Here, however, the phrase is oddly broken. Spes, hope, is split between the first and the second lines, leaving us with aves and pes. This, of course, creates an obvious error. If pes, foot, is the correct word, then its adjective should agree in gender, hence unicus, not unica, as written. Oddly enough, Fulcanelli does not try to elucidate a meaning from this mistake. He doesn't indulge in anagrammic wordplay, only notes that it was done on purpose. Then he moves on to interpret the inscription in light of what he already knows by his own admission of the meaning of the pedestal images. Quote, it is written that life takes refuge in a single space, unquote. However, it is hard to take this seriously. The transformation of meaning is almost unexplained, except by reference to obscure authors and periodicals, and seems based mostly on a deliberate mistake. Fulcanelli declares, quote, the letter S, which takes on the curving shape of a snake, corresponds to the Greek chi, that's X, and takes over its esoteric meaning, unquote. This is so odd as to be jarring. In no system of esoteric knowledge that we've been able to find any such correspondence as Fulcanelli suggests here. Therefore, it must be of a specific attribution used to suggest something important that could not be conveyed without bending the rules. Again, Fulcanelli seems to be clear and direct. quote, it is a heliacoidal track of the sun, having arrived at the zenith of its curve across space at the time of the cyclic catastrophe, unquote. He continues on, telling us that, quote, thanks to the symbolic value of the letter S displaced on purpose, we understand that the inscription must be translated in secret language, unquote. He follows with his translation and then casually suggests that it means, quote, that a country exists where death cannot reach man at the terrible time of the double catastrophe, unquote. Only the elite will be able to find, quote, this promised land, unquote. And with very little direct evidence, Fulcanelli is telling us that the cross at Hendaye is a marker stone to some future catastrophe. Fulcanelli continues his survey, moving to the INRI inscription on the opposite side of the transverse arm of the cross, which he calls the front of the monument. He confuses the order of the images by saying the INRI corresponds with the schematic image of the cycle. 4 A's in the angles of a cross found on the south side of the pedestal. And I'll show you pictures of all this. This implies that the INRI and the 4 A's are on the same side or face of the monument. In fact, that is not the case. The 8-rayed star burst is on the same side as the INRI inscription. Again, Fulcanelli uses a deliberate mistake to point out an important point. Quote, thus we have 2 symbolic crosses, both instruments of the same torture. Above is the divine cross, exemplifying the chosen means of expiation. Below is the global cross, fixing the pole of the northern hemisphere and locating in time the fatal period of this expiation, unquote. We can also take this to mean that there is some sort of similarity between the 4 A's and the starburst. And then Fulcanelli adds a very strange image. Quote, God the Father holds in his hand this globe, surmounted by the fiery sign. The 4 great ages, historical representations of the 4 ages of the world, have their sovereigns shown holding the same attribute, unquote. He names these sovereigns as Alexander, Augustus, Charlemagne, and Louis XIV, and then states that, quote, it is this which explains the inscription INRI, exoterically translated as Iesus Nazarenus Res Indorium, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, but which gives to the cross its secret meaning, Igne Natura Reminator Integra, by fire is nature renewed whole. Fulcanelli comments that it is by fire that, quote, our hemisphere will soon be tried, unquote. He thinks that it will be the wicked day of judgment in which, quote, the good shall be separated from the wicked, unquote. With this cheerful thought, he goes directly to a description of the images on the 4 faces of the pedestal. Fulcanelli changes Boucher's zigzag to a clockwise circle, giving them as sun, moon, star, and geometric figure. The illustration accompanying the text shows the same pattern. Fulcanelli ignores the first 3 figures and spends the last few pages of the chapter elaborating on the 4-fold nature of the last image. See if I can find that one here. Okay, here's the best I can give you for now. I'll give you more later. That there is that's the cross blown out. So that's a pedestal, but that we blew it out here. And you can see the 4 A's are on what it would be the left-hand side. In fact, I'll put it to you like that. You can see it better. See the 4 A's. Okay. Notice that they're Masonic, have that Masonic bent in the middle, like a Masonic sign. Okay, go back here. He tells us the 4 A's, Alpha in Greek or Aleph in Hebrew, are the symbolic letters of the 4 evangelical beasts surrounding Christ, the living human representation of the cross. This image, he notes, is often found in the trifina of the cathedral, such as Chartres, Le Mans, and the Templar chapel at Lutz in the Hot Pyrenees. He then quotes Revelations in the book of Ezekiel and ends up with the Hindu idea of the Kali Yuga. Quote, the age of iron has no other seal than that of death. In hieroglyphs, its hieroglyph is a skeleton bearing the attributes of Saturn, unquote. Fulcanelli concludes the gospel of the age, Fulcanelli states, is science. Quote, because it teaches us that save for a small number of the elite, we must all perish, unquote. In the Fulcanelli phenomena, the author K.R. Johnson includes a chapter by someone called Paul Mevryl entitled Epilogue in Stone. This commentary on the cyclic cross of Hendaye raises as many questions as it answers, not the least of which is who is Paul Mevryl? In the introductory blurb, we are told that the quote, the author is a retired engineer, has an interest in cryptograms and has studied alchemy, Fulcanelli, and other areas of arcane knowledge for many years, unquote. In the text, Mevryl assumes a tone that he tells us in no uncertain terms that he is not Fulcanelli's heir, as Johnson suggests. He is at least his equal. What he has to say, however, is very odd. He confirms the apocalyptic content of the monument, then spins off into a science fiction story of 1950s space brother ramblings about exploding suns and moon-sized arc ships. His explanation of the pedestal images devolves into a murky series of planetary exchanges. First interstellar, involving Sirius, which he calls suggestively the sun behind the sun, and then within the solar system involving Venus. When he turns to the inscription, Mevryl's sense of cryptographic surrealism overwhelms both his argument and the reader. Using Fulcanelli's key S attribution, Mevryl arranges the inscription into the anagram Orcus Ave plus Icanis. He translates this as, quote, Lord of the Dead, hail down from the dog, unquote. Interesting as this is, his extrapolations first lead us to, quote, cyclic destruction, hail down from the dog, unquote. And then even more bizarre, quote, Lord of Sirius, hail down from the dog, unquote. The emphasis seems to be on hail, which Mevryl informs us is a town in the central highlands of Arabia. Someone is having his little laugh on us. The translation of Mevryl's Latin anagram is, quote, the evil one salutes the venom of the dogs, unquote. This in addition to his oblique reference to Set, the Egyptian god of evil, and the Luciferian spin of his science fiction emigration epic leads us to suspect that Mr. Mevryl might just be working for the other side. However, the demiurge's weakness is vanity, and in this, Mevryl is no exception. In the midst of trying to obscure Fulcanelli's revelations about Hendaye, Mevryl cannot help revealing real pieces of information as a way to show his profundity. Without having to go through the entire long and tedious article, we can summarize the nuggets. One, Hendaye as a place and a name does have an important significance. The egg apocalypse mountain attribution, Hendaye, Endaye, Andaye, seems a little skewed by its English content. However, Andaye is a word for a mountain, suggests that only the Andes of South America. Yet Mevryl, in all of his geographic meandering, never mentions anything about South America. The Atlantean significance of the Basque Coast is an important clue, as in the reference to Ignatius Donnelly's Atlantis. Two, the insistence on a 12,000-year span between Iron Age to Iron Age is confusing. It may be an attempt to turn us away from the 13,000-year processional number, or it may point to a real event at the turn of the 10th millennia BCE, such as the destruction of Atlantis. Three, Mevryl starts building his asteroid theory in his second paragraph, quote, simultaneously. He informs us concerning the Cross of Hendaye. It is an observation upon the nature and the timing of tremendous world events involving yet another kind of stone, unquote. He also brings up Otto Muck's, quote, an asteroid killed Atlantis theory, which is interesting since the Venus or star, Earth, moon, and sun alignment he postulates would seem to match the images on the pedestal. However, this strike, which caused the Puerto Rican Trench, and peppered coastal Carolina with meteor craters occurred in the late Jurassic, not 12,000 years ago. It couldn't have been the cause of Atlantis' destruction. Mevryl makes no attempt to connect the solar flames or explosions he sees on the sun face with the periodic asteroid swarm, a double catastrophe perhaps, but seemingly unrelated. 4, his basic description of the monument, noting the importance of the XX on the top of the cross and its original placement facing the 4 directions, is sound. He does not attribute any specific face to any specific directions. He does, however, begin with the star face of the monument, which he naturally would be facing east. This is the alignment given in Boucher's 1936 article. 5, he notes the 4 stars, 6 pointed on the sun face of the monument, and relates them to the 4 sons of Horus. 6, he states that the path of Horus, the heavenly Nile, is the ecliptical flight path between the 2 star systems. An interesting concept, but Mevryl attributes it to Horus the Elder, although he confuses him with Horus, the son of Isis and Osiris. He avoids connecting the heavenly Nile with the Milky Way, another interesting oversight. The 4 stars around the sun face may also stand for planets, 2 inner and 2 outer, such as Venus and Mercury, Mars and Jupiter, or the Earth too. This is slipped in casually, almost as if it were an aside. Mevryl's explication of Champagne's front piece to Mystery of the Cathedrals gives the whole game away. Stand between the paths of the Sphinx, the paws of the Sphinx, I think that's supposed to say, and look where he is looking, waiting for the return of Horus in the horizon, that is the Sphinx in the sky, and Horus the Elder, or Mars. Mevryl implies that this is the arrival of the asteroids, striking at hail in Arabia, with the place of refuge in the Himalayas far beyond. There is a Druidic connection throughout the decorated standing stone mentioned above. Mevryl's awareness of this connection and his sly reference to the Druidic Hendaye discussed by MacGregor Mathers, one of the founders of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, suggests that he did know the whole story. Beyond these points, Mevryl's article is an expertise in applied obscurity. If he is Fulcanelli's heir or one of his peers from the dark side, then he or they are going to great lengths to obscure and conceal the meaning of the monument. The original Hendaye chapter said too much, too clearly, and perhaps Mevryl's work was intended to muddy up the water. At any rate, the puzzle remains, although the pieces are all there, waiting for those with ears to hear and eyes to see. Mevryl acknowledges that there will be a great disaster and implies it will be the result of a huge asteroid strike. After contradicting himself a number of times, he concludes there is a swarm of asteroids that race through the solar system, causing havoc every 12,000 years or so. The military-industrial complex of the United States began thinking the same thing just as Mevryl's essay appeared in print. The Fulcanelli phenomenon came out in 1980. By then, the entire military and space program was buzzing with talk about the possibility of asteroid strikes. The scientist Edward Teller suddenly began lobbying President Reagan to fund something called SDI, or the Strategic Defense Initiative. After much lobbying, Reagan successfully funded the SDI, or Star Wars as it became known. Supposedly, Star Wars was built to strike down Russian nuclear missiles as they attacked the US. A few years later, when George Bush was president, the Democratic Congress decided that it wanted to cut funding for Star Wars. Bush's vice president, Dan Quayle, stood up for the project. He admitted in a CNN interview that Star Wars could also double as a giant asteroid killer. He argued that that's why the project's funding shouldn't be stopped by the US Congress. In the end, they decided to keep the funding going. What if SDI was actually built to shoot down incoming asteroids and not missiles? Does this mean that Mevryl's essay on the Cross of Hendaye caused the military-industrial complex to begin looking up in the sky for asteroids? It is possible. Without overemphasizing Mevryl's research, it would not be the first time that agencies within the US government had shown interest in alchemical and occult matters. The OSS and the CIA were looking for Fulcanelli himself at one point. What makes Mevryl's essay so odd is the peculiar sequence of events that took place soon after it was published. Within a year of its release, tunnels for the MX missiles were proposed to be built under the Western United States. Even though the project was canceled, there were soon rumors of tunneling by some mysterious agency of the military cropping up all over the Southwest. There was the Taos hum, which some said was the sound of massive tunneling going on under the high desert of New Mexico. And then there's the Denver International Airport. Thrust down the throats of the people of Colorado, DIA, as it became known, was 3 years behind in construction and $4 billion over budget when it finally opened. There are persistent rumors about secret trains running in tunnels deep beneath the airport. Workers who install drywall and plumbing fixtures talk of having to go deep down in elevators that run for many floors under the airport. Recently, the rumor mill began churning with news that these secret trains under the airport are actually a government program called COG, for Continuity of Government. This is a secret plan to save the heads of the government and military in case of an emergency. The rumors about COG say that these trains are heading back and forth under the entire front range of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. These trains run deep into the Rocky Mountains. It has been known for a long time that the United States has carved out the insides of huge mountains in Colorado. NORAD headquarters carved out of the insides of a huge mountain in Colorado. NORAD headquarters inside Cheyenne Mountain near Colorado Springs is one of the more famous examples. It is possible that COG has carved out giant areas inside the largest mountains designed to withstand just about any kind of disaster. This sounds like the biggest paranoid rant from the worst conspiracy theorist in the universe, but there are many other strange things about Denver International Airport. For one, there is a plaque that thanks the Grand Master of the Colorado Masons for helping to build the airport. Also thanked in the same mysterious entity called the New World Airport Commission. This plaque can be seen on the north side of the main pavilion of Denver International Airport. COG may be a government response to the belief that the world is going to end soon. In 1982, Ronald Reagan's Secretary of the Interior, James Watt, inexplicably told the country that we didn't have to care for the environment anymore because the world was going to end soon. The verdict from all of this seems to be that the US government and the Pentagon have been preparing for the end of the world for over 20 years. Yeah, so that was the very first time in print that the Denver International Airport got mentioned, and I guess I was the first person to see all that stuff at the Denver airport. But you know, it wasn't Paul Mevryl's article or essay that may have caused it either, because the DUMBs, the deep underground military bases, started really in the early 60s, right after Fulcanelli's Hendaye chapter came out. And we can see that they don't want you to know. And so we're going to further explore, not on this where I'm reading, but on the other show that I'm doing here, some of the evidence for a disaster in the past involving the sun. And that's where this is going next. So thank you for watching and listening. And I'm Jay Widener, and this has been Reality Check, reading from my book with the late, great Vincent Bridges, A Monument to the End of Time, Alchemy, Fulcanelli, and the Great Cross. Thank you very much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Hit like, subscribe, and all that other stuff. And I'll see you next week. I promise I'll be back.